Don't hit that skip button because I have huge news for you. The Rewind of the Living Dead t shirt lives. It is here. It is available to purchase. Oh, yes, I'm not kidding. We finally got our Rewind of the Living Dead t shirt out, and it's amazing. It is printed by the same company that prints for Cavity Colors and Fright Rags, which, if you're a hardcore horror fan who buys a lot of horror t shirts, I know I do, you know that's the very best and highest quality because we couldn't do anything less for our fans. It's an amazing full color design designed by Jason Ragosta. It's very cool. It features a zombified myself, a zombified Damon, and it looks just like an awesome horror shirt because that's what we want, because we're horror fans too. So we wanted to make a t-shirt that you could really sink your teeth into. Go to rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com. Again, that's rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com to get your t-shirt today. Rewind of the Living Dead is a review show, so spoilers are ahead.
Stephen King is widely considered the greatest horror writer in history, so it's no surprise that his massive catalog has been mined for adaptations on television and films ever since his first novel was released in 1974. While Carrie was the first book he ever released, King's reputation was first made through short stories he released, including one called The Boogeyman that came out in Cavalier magazine in 1973. It wasn't until 45 years later that a group of filmmakers decided to adapt the story into a film, and the movie finally got a green light in 2021 from the studio, with Rob Savage brought on as a director. The film was originally expected to drop as a streaming original on Hulu, but the success of horror movies both during and after the pandemic ultimately earned the adaptation a theatrical release instead. The story centers around a family besieged by grief, following a tragic death and a creature hell-bent on feasting on their misery.
It's known by many names.
They called it the Boogeyman. I think it's been around forever.
But everywhere it goes,
What is this?
the screams sound the same. The Boogeyman.
I'm serious, Sawyer. I need to be alone.
Rated PG-13.
In the latest episode of Rewind of the Living Dead, we're going to make sure the lights stay on as we review the 2023 film, The Boogeyman. Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I'm the Boogeyman. Oh, I'm Patrick Guerra.
And Patrick, we are here this week to talk about The Boogeyman, but if you heard the beginning of the show, we had a special announcement. New episode, big announcement. We have Rewind of the Living Dead t-shirts, finally.
The
You weren't
t-shirts.
wearing one, right? I should be wearing one myself.
I know, you're not wearing yours. What the hell, Damon?
No, I'm wearing my Pride Fangoria shirt. It's Pride Month, and I felt
It is Pride Month.
like-
Happy Pride
and
Month.
Fangoria does a run with Fright Rags every year, and so I decided to wear my Pride shirt today. But yes, the t-shirts are out. You can own your own Rewind of the Living Dead t-shirt. As you mentioned at the top of the show, we'll talk about it again later, but we finally have our own t-shirts, Patrick. It's so exciting.
Oh, I'm so fucking excited. They're really, really high quality. I don't want to get too into it. I don't want to make this a Rewind of the Living Dead t-shirt commercial, but damn it, it is. It's great. You want it. You got it. You're gonna have to get it. I'm not kidding. By the way, it's already selling. It's already out there. So get yours while they last.
Yeah, we made a point with this shirt is to make it quality, as we mentioned in the plug there, that it's the same company that prints for Fright Rags. The reason we did that, and the reason I sought that out, was because I love Fright Rags, Cavity Colors, Terror Threads, Gutter Garbs, companies that do great horror shirts. And I was like, if we're going to do a t-shirt, Patrick, we got to do it quality. We can't half-ass it. We can't have it printed on those cardboard ass, bro, you know what I mean? Those just cheap t-shirts that you can buy, at Walmart. I want to get you a good, if you're buying our t-shirt, I want you to be proud to wear our t-shirt. So we really went all out to make sure this one looks good. So we'll talk about it more later, but the t-shirts are available now. So please support the podcast and pick up one. It's a limited run, so please go pick up a t-shirt. So
Please and thank you.
with that being said, Patrick, this week we are talking about The Boogeyman. Of course, last week we did Carrie as kind of an intro talking about Stephen King films, and now we are doing the latest. This is one that was in planning for several years and didn't officially get the green light until 2021. As I mentioned in the intro, a lot of people have been involved in this film over the years. A lot of different reiterations on the script and the director and the direction of the film. Originally going to be streaming on Hulu, and now it's, of course, in theaters. I'm a big believer, even not the best horror films are better in theaters. The theater experience can't be matched. We'll get into all the good and the bad about The Boogeyman. That's why we're here. But I will say in and of itself, like, the film was better simply because I was sitting in a movie theater watching it. So for that alone, I'm glad that they got that kind of release versus just being on Hulu.
I think it's no surprise that their test audiences were through the roof for this, because test audiences for horror movies are going to be good because people really react. We're a cool fan base. I mean, shall I pat us on the back, Damon? Yes, I will. I mean, we are a good fan base as far as moviegoers are. And I went to a packed theater. I didn't even expect it to be packed. I went on like at a weird time on a Sunday because my schedule's been so crazy, and the theater was just, I mean, completely crowded. And the reactions were great, and it's just so much fun being in the theater. If you can't or you don't want to be in the theaters, we get it. It's still great to like shut all the lights off and just watch it in a dark room, because we're psychos like that. We love. I watch way more scary movies than we ever talk about on this show. The truth be told, I do a lot of research for the show, I should say, and it's an absolute labor of love. And yeah, here we are with yet another Stephen King adaptation from the mind of Rob Savage. Now, if that name sounds somewhat familiar, well, that's because Rob Savage directed a little found footage film called Host, maybe one of the bigger found footage films of the last 10, 20 years. I don't know. And also Beck and Woods. Now, Damon, you want to school people on who Beck and Woods are? Because they're no small names either.
Yeah, that's a bigger deal than what you probably realize if you're not in like the minutia of horror.
Believe me, we're all up in the minutia.
We are all up in the minutia. Yeah, and like I said, this was a film that really did go through a lot of reiteration. So, but obviously, Beck and Woods are best known for the two together, along with why am I forgetting his name? Krasinski, sorry. Writing A Quiet Place, excuse me. Which, of course, is one of the biggest horror films of the past decade, give or take.
Yeah. So you got a director with a big film from the past decade, and you got two writers with a huge film from the past decade. So...
Sorry, John Krasinski. I don't know why I forgot your name. I apologize.
He was on a show I've never heard of.
I was like I knew A Quiet Place, and then it was just like, what was the guy's name? Oh yeah, John, one of the biggest names in Hollywood right now. Yeah, John Krasinski. Yes, him, that guy. Sorry. Yes, they wrote A Quiet Place with John Krasinski. Apologies for not remembering his name. But yes, they're obviously very prolific screenwriters, well known, especially in the horror industry. They also worked. They worked on a lot of stuff together. They worked on a lot of things together. They did 65, that recent Adam Driver film. Didn't necessarily do the best, but it is what it is.
Okay.
Which is another found footage film that is a very beloved horror film amongst the horror community. There's another one. So yeah, these guys are very, very well known, and they brought their talents to The Boogeyman. And Patrick, when I make that sigh, it sounds like I'm about to share some bad news.
Here he comes.
Here's the thing. No spoilers. We'll get into spoilers later in categories. The Boogeyman is a movie that has a lot of potential, and it's realized in some ways, and I'll get to how they realize it in some ways and not realize in a lot of others. And I feel like, and please correct me, listen, we understand Hollywood and in general, directors and writers are notorious for course correcting during a film.
Oh, yeah.
They'll change things during. There's a reason why, with the WGA writer's strike going on right now, why a lot of productions have completely shut down, because when you're on set, writers will change things in the middle of filming. Like the director will say, no, this doesn't work. We got to change this. They'll go to the writer and say, you got to rewrite this scene. You got to write a whole new scene, whatever the case may be. And it will change the direction. Now, I know this film has been in the works for a while and it was filmed a while ago, but I wonder if editing is where I'm coming at with this one, Patrick. I wonder if in the editing process there was any reaction at all. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm fine if I'm wrong. I'm not saying I'm not accusing anybody. I have no proof of this. I'm just asking the question. There's a similar tone in the story and the execution of this film to another film that opened last year, a very popular film by the name of Smile.
Yeah.
A plague-like creature-ish kind of feature that attaches itself to a certain kind of person and kind of goes from, and I know, and Smile, of course, a lot of people say, well, it's very much like It Follows. A little bit of that, you know what I mean? But this one's similar in tone. And I can't help but wonder if maybe they didn't alter or change a few things or edit certain things in this film to try to get away from being compared to Smile, even though I think the comparisons are easily made in this film. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Did you get any of that in this film when you watched? Like, there were similarities to Smile, and it felt like maybe they veered away from that, like, in production.
I mean, the complicated answer is all of the above, because this is just what happens during pre-production, during production itself, as you said, when the director's on set and going, in this page we have to do this thing, but we definitely can't do this thing based on the setup that we have. We need to rewrite it and rethink it, or the actor has a different note, or they've come up with a different idea and they're going to go with it, and it changes everything. I mean, the movie is not finally written until the final edited film is up on the screen. That's the last time the movie's written. So they get into the editorial bay, they've got all this footage, they're going through it, and you can continue to shape the story. On my last short film, that was exactly how that was going. With me and my editor, we were even making decisions even beyond my film was 7 minutes long. There shouldn't have been that much to think about, but there was, where it was like, oh, if we do this a little bit differently and we put this here instead of there, it kind of makes this stronger. There's good and bad to that. The good is, like, you have all these great creatives that come in and put their 2 cents in to, like, hone something and make it better and better and better. The bad news is you have too many people in the soup, and then before you know it, it's inedible because too many ingredients have gone in. Any one of those things can happen. I'm not quite sure. I think where I was getting kind of the Smile and your next vibes was more of the idea of something passing on to the next person.
Yeah.
Without getting into too many spoilers. The one that really got me, the name, the particular horror property that got me was The Outsider, which is another Stephen King adaptation.
Yeah.
And if you saw that TV show, well, I don't really want to spoil the specific subject matter, but at some point down the line in this movie, I was like, this is The Outsider, which is also a Stephen King thing. And I don't know if that was just, have you read this, The Boogeyman by Stephen King?
I have read The Boogeyman and I have read The Outsider. And I've said, just to be on the record with this, I actually think The Outsider TV series is better than the book. Don't get me wrong. The book is good.
Sure.
I think the TV series is actually a little bit better. Close in a lot of ways, but different. And I think it is better. And I love The Outsider TV show, by the way. I just want to mention.
Yeah, this is a good show.
Limited series on HBO. If you haven't seen it, run to go see it. It's amazing. Yeah, and I have read it, and there are similarities. And I would say this: we got to remember, The Boogeyman was written and released in 1973. The Outsider was one of Stephen King's fairly recent books, like in the last 6 or 7 years.
Okay.
Authors, and when you're Stephen King and you've got 1,000 books on your bibliography, you're going to maybe repeat a little bit of material or take mine from earlier ideas and mine them and make them better into later ideas. The Boogeyman was a short story. This is just a short little story, more or less that was morphed into a full feature-length film. Certainly can be done. We've seen it done before. I mean, The Shawshank Redemption is a short story by Stephen King, and it morphed into, in my opinion, one of the greatest films ever made. So you can do it. It can be done, but there are elements where you can get repetitive. I've done it. I've written, and I'm talking about like in nonfiction journalists, like in my normal day job, I've had elements of a story I've written, and I remember that element, and then I don't want to say I reuse, I don't plagiarize myself, but I take an element of that and I remember, oh yeah, I did this in that story. I want to repeat it and do it better a few years later. I've done that. That's part of writing. I mean, that's just part of what you do. So there are a lot of similarities here between that. And I would say I would imagine that, again, no proof of this, no clue if this is how Stephen King's writing process was. But the Boogeyman is based so much around grief, right? I mean, that's not a spoiler. We can get that. You know, the Boogeyman essentially, you know, the plot, the synopsis of this film is that two sisters are dealing with the loss of their mother, and this creature kind of inhabits their home looking to feast upon their grief. That's not a spoiler. That's literally the plot of the film, and you can find that anywhere. Um, I think that is a very simplistic overview of what this film is.
Mm-hmm.
The Outsider and Smile, in my opinion, take it 10 steps further in terms of exploring that dynamic. And I think my biggest shortcoming with the Boogeyman is that it doesn't do that. It doesn't really dive deep on that dynamic of relating the creature to the grief. We do get elements of that. I'm not saying we don't. It's clearly what they're going for. But it feels like they missed, and they didn't go as far as they should have in this film, as far as really digging into the because to me, there's two directions you can go in a film like this. You either have to really take a deep dive on the grief, the real, like the understanding of loss, right? And this is a loss of a parent. And these are two young girls. One's a teenager in high school. The other one's supposed to be 8 or 9 years old. The girl, who plays the sister, who was actually young Princess Leia in Obi-Wan Kenobi. So you have two well-known actors. Sophie Thatcher, of course, who is in Yellow Jackets. She's tremendous. And the younger actress who played young Princess Leia in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. They're playing sisters, and we're dealing with the loss of a parent. So that grief can really be explored. Or part two of that is exploring the mythology of the creature. That's a big one. Now, when you watch The Outsider, they do both. They really dive in. And you're talking about a 10 episodes series.
Yeah, TV show.
8 episode series, whatever. It's a lot deeper. But I feel like that's two of the directions they could have gone, and I don't feel like they went far enough into either, in my opinion.
Yeah, it almost sounds to me like, based on the history of all this, that maybe what his short story was back in the 70s, The Boogeyman, he honed into The Outsider, and then we got The Outsider, you know, in recent years, because he was like, cool, I want to like play on that idea for a little bit. But I feel like we're getting dangerously into spoiler territory, because we have to get into that. I don't want to tie us up too much before we get into spoilers trying to talk about that stuff. So I'm going to back up a little bit and just talk about something that I think is more, I guess, a broader theme that the movie displays, that I don't know if that ever came across in the book or not, but the movie experience, and we talked about sitting in the theater with a bunch of people, it really played on something that I actually appreciated a lot. And it's mainly because I have 2 small children right now. And it's a two-pronged theme here. And one is being afraid of the dark and being afraid of the closet monster. Now, you talk about, in this movie, we're dealing with kids. One is obviously a little kid, which is a kid about my older son's age, and then a teenager. Kids are afraid of the dark. Kids are afraid of their closet being open. Every night when I say goodnight to my kids, if that closet door is open, they remind me, Dad, close the closet door. Like, they're freaked because they think there's going to be a monster that comes out of there. Now, they don't even watch horror movies, except for the one time my son accidentally watched Pamela Voorhees get beheaded. Outside of that, they don't really watch horror movies. They watch, Lost Boys is one of their favorite horror movies, but it's not really a horror movie. It's just kind of fun and cool. So I don't know where they get these ideas, but there's something primal about being afraid of the dark and being afraid of a cavernous region that you can't look into and see what's going on in there. You have to assume danger. It would have been cool to kind of explore it on a deeper level. I think they kind of try a little bit. This movie actually throws a lot at you, but I really did think that the themes of being afraid of the dark and being afraid of the closet monster, especially the closet monster idea, was explored in this movie in a deeper way than I've seen it pretty much in a long time. Maybe because I think writers think, or writers, directors, or whoever think, oh, that's too obvious. And they almost never go with it. It's so rare to see anyone go with the closet monster. The one that comes to mind for me is from Monster Squad, when the kid's like, monsters in my closet. And the dad's like, yeah, right. Whoa, there's a monster. And he's got the door open and the mummy's in there reaching out to the kid. Fantastic, funny gag. But like, I think movies just avoid the idea of like, there's a monster in the closet because they think it's just too basic. Whereas this movie leans all the way into it. Closets play a huge role in this movie. I know it sounds silly to be like, hey man, closets, but it worked. Like if I can talk about the strengths of this movie, the dark and the closets really worked in this movie.
I would agree with you. And this is where I run into a brick wall a little bit with this movie, because one part of me feels one way and the other part of me feels the other way. Let me explain what I mean. I agree. I was a little kid once and I always had to have a nightlight on. Always. When I was a little kid, nightlight, under the bed, creature, closet.
Right.
I was 100% that kid. And I was a horror movie kid. I saw horror movies way before I should have seen horror movies.
We had reasons.
Yeah. So I was 100% convinced Freddy Krueger was going to come flying out of my closet when I was a kid. So I understand that fear and that torment of a kid. Like, I get it. I had a nightlight, and when that nightlight burned out, man, I freaked the hell out. Trust me, I get it. So in that regard, I was like, wow, this was actually, I agree with you, it was really well done. The shadow play and the cinematography, the elusiveness of actually seeing what we're seeing in the Boogeyman, things like that, that was all great. I enjoyed a lot of that. Here's where I ran into a bit of the brick wall, though, is because I felt like this is a PG-13 film, which we've talked about in the past. PG-13, you walk a really fine line doing PG-13 with horror, because, and it's, to me, to be clear, I'm not saying it's about the gore and or just the pure violence or even the language, really. While those are all staples of that, I feel like sometimes when you're trying to appeal to the biggest audience possible, and the best comparison I can give you is watch any network television show, watch Law and Order, watch I'm trying to think what other network shows are. They watch comedies like The Conners or Big Bang Theory. They can be fun. I'm not saying they're not funny. I'm not saying they're not creative or well written. I'm not absolutely not insulting any of them, but they are playing to the widest possible audience. Then sit down and watch something like Succession or Barry or Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, shows like that are just raw and real and
they're the biggest shows in history. Well, that's the thing, is those shows are unforgettable shows.
Yeah, and there's a reason why that's called prestige television, because that is where you go, and that's the freedom you have when you're on an HBO or a Showtime or a network like that. Even
AMC.
Yeah, even if you want to FX, like Sons of Anarchy, like that pushed a big envelope when that show was out. Yeah. But they didn't. But they would never run Sons of Anarchy on CBS or ABC or NBC. That to me is what PG-13 horror is. It's like they try to appeal to the widest possible audience, which is how you get a PG-13 rating. And so I feel like they don't go far enough in a lot of situations, where I think like some of the terror in this film would have been more terrifying had they pushed it and ratcheted up a couple notches, which maybe would have pushed them into PG-13 and maybe pushed them into R-rated territory. And that's where I run into the wall, because if I'm a kid, and I'm saying kid like up to like 13, this is still a fully suitable horror movie for the most part.
Oh, yeah.
For that age group, which is what PG-13 is supposed to be. And when you talk about the closet monster and the monster under the bed and being afraid of the dark, that all plays really well. And that audience up to, well, let's just say 16, like teenage years, you know what I mean?
Sure.
It's going to play well with that audience, because you remember, I mean, we remember, and we're way older than that. That's going to tap into that primal instinct of being terrified of the dark and the closet. We all remember that, but you're going to remember a lot more vividly when you're, of that age. The problem is if you push it further, which I think would have made this a stronger horror film, and then you go into that R-rated territory, you might lose that audience. And that's where you get into what you're talking about, where people are going to be like, why would you do the closet monster? It's so, so typical or so stereotypical. And, that's not scary, blah, blah, blah. That's where I feel like that divide is. So it's a weird brick wall with this film where it's like one part of me says you're absolutely 100% correct. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the movie. What killed it for me is the terror, the really horrifying parts didn't go far enough. And there are a couple moments that are really well done, but I'm saying like you feel like they could have ratcheted up. But that's where you go into, well, now we got to change it from a PG-13 movie to an R movie, and you lose the audience that would appreciate the closet monster and the creature hiding under your bed and those kind of things that are a little bit more simplistic. Does that all make sense what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying, because what I think of is I go, if Smile was PG-13, it would not have been my favorite horror film of 2022. It was my favorite horror film of 2022 because A, it was scary and well crafted scares, and we'll get into that, and B, it was gory as all fucking get out. Like it went all the way, and this movie doesn't go all the way. It does do the PG-13 thing. I would say that's actually not my problem with this movie. My problem with this movie is way more spoiler territory stuff. It's very much story-based stuff.
Well, let me be clear. That's one of my problems, but that's what I can't get into as spoilers. That's one of my bigger, like, overarching issues.
I mean, I would say that a gory version of this, or a hardcore, however you want to play it, a hardcore version of this movie could exist, but it would also be a sacrifice to a lot of the story that they build, because it's not really about people dying until like the last moments, best way I can say it. It's not about impending doom and death as much as it is about a lot of other things, which we'll get into in spoilers, because it's just not how it's not how the structure of this movie was put together. So going into the gore and all that stuff, I would have loved to have seen it, but it didn't necessarily. I don't think it needed it for what they were trying to do, but what they were trying to do also didn't really work for me. So there's that. It's kind of weird how that works.
Yeah. Also, one other thing I do want to compliment this movie on it, there was a couple moments where they butted against it, and it kind of bummed me out they did this. But one thing I did like about this movie, in terms of the cinematography, the terms of the way it was shot, and the terms of the way it was filmed, and when it obviously got on screen, this film is all about grief and loss. As we mentioned at the top of the show, this is about a father and two daughters who have lost their mother and wife, respectively. One thing I did enjoy about this, and when I say I'm comparing it to this, understand, I'm not saying it's the same film. One thing I loved about the film Hereditary, and I'm not comparing this to Hereditary in this way, but one thing I loved about Hereditary, when you are with the family in Hereditary, when you're with the mother, the father, and the son, and the daughter for part of the movie, you feel so isolated because they're in this kind of farmhouse. There's kind of like in this isolated house, kind of off the beaten path. And you really do feel a sense of isolation when you're with them in that house. Like you feel like there's no hope, no escape. It's them against the world together. And then they kind of turn on each other through a course of events without getting into too much of Hereditary. Now, I'm not saying the Boogeyman is like Hereditary. It's not at all. But what they did really well for a big part, I would say about 3/4 of this movie, is they really did do a good job of making this family feel isolated. And they're not isolated in terms of like, they live in a neighborhood. Like they're not living in the middle of the boonies, and, they're not in like some, they're not in like the middle of an Iowa cornfield, or it's not signs where, they're surrounded by cornfields. They're in a, but that's what I liked about the way they shot this and the way they made it feel more intimate is that when you're in the house with this family, with this father and these two girls, it feels isolated. They feel alone. They feel all alone. And that I really did appreciate, because you feel that sense of isolation. That to me was one of the most important parts of this movie, because when you talk about grief and loss, that's how you feel. You feel alone, even though you're grieving with your family. In this case, the 16-year-old girl, I'm assuming she's like 16 in this movie, her younger sister is still processing what grief is, because she's too young to truly understand it. And then her father, who is a therapist, he's got a whole other bag of issues, because psychologically, he should be able to deal with this. He teaches people how to deal with this. That's his job. But then he's also struggling to cope with it in his own mind, as you would. I was, I was a few quarters away from having a psychology degree. I understand how that works, like the process of grief and the 7 stages of grief, all these kind of things. But as we always say, doctors are the worst patients. It's very much that in this regard, where the father is probably the one in most denial about the death of his wife. And so throughout this film, the way they shoot it and the way you spend the majority of your time in this home is it does feel very isolated. They feel very alone in just these 3 people. And I really enjoyed that part of it, because to me, that was the best aspect of terror, because throughout this film, every time they would continue to ratchet up the issues or the incidents in this movie, you just felt so alone. Like they'd be in one room and you felt alone. They'd be in a room together and you feel alone. Like there was just that iciness to this movie, and I did enjoy that.
Yeah, there's an element of it. It's just, I'm like fully muzzled in spoiler territory with most of my thoughts on that, because as much as you're right, they are very much isolated by their grief. They are almost, like they're completely outside of the rest of society, even though they're interacting with society. But my big issue comes with a lot of spoiler stuff, so I don't think I'll elaborate on it here. But it's kind of like the opposite. Like they did something that I'm like, I wish they would have done the opposite of this, and instead they kind of, I don't know how to get through it, because I need spoilers to unleash myself.
Yeah, well, let's get into that, because there is it's hard. Again, we always try to give our review and then give our better review with the spoilers and the categories. Before we get to categories, before we get to spoilers, let me just say this about The Boogeyman. I've seen a lot of mixed reviews out there for this film. I've heard some people saying it's a good, solid PG-13 horror film. I've heard other people say it's terrible, don't go watch it. Here's what I would say. I still enjoyed myself for a large part of this movie. It's not, listen, I'm just being honest. This is not going to be a film that at the end of 2023, I'm going to be praising left, right, and center and saying this is one of the best of the year. But for a formulaic PG-13 horror film, and let me be clear, it is a formulaic PG-13 horror film produced by a major studio. I say all that to preface the fact that you're not going to get a lot of over-the-top horror. You're not going to get any over-the-top gore, and you're not going to get any over-the-top, they're not pushing the envelope in this film, okay? Let me be clear about that. They are not trying to push the limits on this film, which I kind of appreciate when you do. That's not anything to do with the PG-13 aspect. I'm just talking about pushing the envelope to really make you queasy or make you feel a certain way. They didn't really go that deep in this movie. That being said, for a formulaic PG-13 horror film, and there's a lot of those out there, I would say this is pretty solid. It's a film that I would revisit. I wouldn't hate rewatching. And that to me is really I know it's not the highest praise in the world, but it is praise, because trust me, Patrick, there's a lot of PG, because we talked about this many times in the show. After Scream came out, and that was an R-rated horror, of course, but after Scream came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, studios started blasting out PG-13 horror films, because Scream got teenagers back into the theater with horror, and so they're like, hold on now, Scream did really, really good. How can we get even more? How can we get even more? How can we milk more money out of this industry? And then you just got a string of just color by numbers, absolutely cut inside the lines, PG-13 garbage. I mean, they were just like, oh, it's about teens, and there's a tragedy, or there's a killer, and it's in a high school or a college. Can we make it PG-13? Green light. And it was mostly trash. This isn't that. So I will say that for a PG-13 horror film, it is not that. But as we get into spoilers in a second, I will say here's the issues. But again, not bad. I genuinely mean that. It's not a bad film. I think there are some people in the horror community that are a little over hating this film, maybe because it's a major film release, a major theatrical release. But I didn't. Again, it's not a film I'm going to be calling my friends about, saying, "Dude, you got to see the Boogeyman." But it's certainly not a film that when it came out, when I left the theater, I was just disappointed either. So that I know that's not the highest praise, but it's also not. It's certainly not indoctrination to say that this is a bad film.
Yeah, I would give it like a B minus, which is, I mean, I really don't want to rate. We're not in the business of rating movies on this podcast, but it's certainly not us saying, I'd probably skip this one, which I doubt. We never really even say that anyway, because we're not true reviewers. Because I think reviewers get off on being like powerful and going thumbs up or thumbs down. Fuck all that. My point is your point, is that for a formulaic PG-13 horror movie, better than a lot of them. So I'm more actually encouraging people to check it out and see what they think of it, because for all the movies that feel very familiar and safe in horror, which I could categorize this as, it just does it better. And we'll get into that in spoilers. By the way, Damon, spoilers and categories this week brought to you by the Rewind of the Living Dead t-shirt that you can get at rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com. Sizes small to 2XL. Limited run, folks. This is a limited run. Get it now. Get them while they last, because they will not be here forever. And I swear to God, the quality of these are amazing. Multicolor print. Looks fantastic. It looks like just a horror shirt. You wouldn't know at any other time that you're necessarily repping a podcast, but it's a badass t-shirt. And yeah, this week we're sponsored by ourselves.
Yes, this was a labor of love to get this t-shirt made. The great Jason Ragosta did the design. We worked very hard with him to get the design the way we envisioned it, to get it the way we wanted it. That got done, which you've seen the image, because we got that done first, which was the image you see on the podcast every week. If you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever, that's the image you're seeing. And then we decided, we're like, we need to transform this into high quality t-shirts. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, Patrick, I buy a lot of t-shirts. I have a closet full of band and mostly horror t-shirts. That's kind of my wardrobe.
Same.
And I bought a lot of shirts, and a lot of band shirts in particular, where I buy a shirt at a concert and I spend like $35-$40, and I pick it up and I'm just like, this feels like it was printed on someone's home. Like, like someone ironed this on and pulled the graphic off, and you printed it on the cheapest, like $6 boxy heavyweight cardboard ass t-shirt possible. And I'm always a little disappointed. I'm like, you're charging me $40. Like, couldn't you put a little bit more effort into I don't mind paying the $40 if it's quality. Well, that's why it was a big point big point for us to make sure these were high quality, not low produced, not ironed on, not, they're not, this is screen printed t-shirts, and screen printing makes if you know anything about t-shirts, screen printing is what you want. You do not want digitally printed shirts, because that is where you're going to get almost like the vinyl kind of graphic on your shirt. Now,
yeah, it looks weird.
I own some of those. I do. And I'm not saying like you're condemned for making your shirts on like the digital printing, but screen printing is the higher quality shirts. That's when you're getting the fright rags and the cavity colors and the terror threads and gutter guards, the high-end horror shirts you can buy out there. That's what we did for that reason, because I wanted to make a t-shirt that I would wear. And I do wear this t-shirt, and I love this t-shirt. And so that's why we wanted to put it out there to the world. And hopefully you guys will love this t-shirt too.
Oh, I know they're going to love it. It's fantastic.
Rock it at a horror convention. I promise you, it's worth it. It is absolutely worth it.
Yeah, they're going to go, oh my God, you're into Rewind Living Dead too? So am I. My name is Kevin Bacon. How are you? That's exactly what's going to happen at a horror convention.
Exactly. RewindoftheLivingDead.bigcartel.com. Sizes small through 2XL. And here's a little spoiler for you, Patrick. I'm giving a little inside baseball secret here. The person shipping those t-shirts to you is me. So this isn't some big conglomerate. I got a tooling away in the back room with t-shirts, and they're working like my little elves at Christmas time. No, it's all me. I'm shipping them. So when you get the Rewind of Living Dead t-shirt, realize it came from us. It's like literally us.
Literally from us. Yes, literally. We did send two t-shirts out to our biggest fans. We'll give a shout out to the Brutal Arts people. If you're ever at any Southern horror conventions, you should check out their booth out there. We sent them some. I even sent it with a handwritten note. You're not going to get a handwritten note from us, but Damon is going to ship it very much so from his own two hands. It's coming to you. So that's how we're doing this, because we want to make sure that we give you the utmost quality. We weren't just hawking t-shirts here, folks. We wanted to give you something really good.
Yeah, so rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com. Get your orders in. It is a limited run, so please support the podcast and support it by buying the t-shirts. All right, Patrick, let's get into spoilers and categories with the Boogeyman. Now, our categories are a little shorter tonight because... And we'll talk about that because we already kind of mentioned it. There's not a ton of gore. There's not a ton of kills and things that we normally would talk about. Now, that's not to say, again, it's a bad film. It's just some of the categories we would normally talk about we can't talk about. So let me throw the call to you right now. You mentioned there's something you had an issue with, but you couldn't talk about until spoilers. So the floor is yours, my friend. What is it with the Boogeyman where I tried to get around it with no spoilers? What can you now talk about with spoilers?
I mean, listen. Okay, we did say in the pre-spoiler section, it's a family dealing with grief. And you did mention that they're all isolated. That's true. Here's the problem. They're even isolated from each other. To the point that, the daughter, Sadie Harper, played by Sophie Thatcher, Sadie is trying to talk to her dad about it. He doesn't want to talk about it. Sawyer, the little daughter, she is still trying to understand how to get through it all. So Sadie, who's our lead, is kind of on her own, and she goes, and when we come into this movie, we meet her as like the day she's coming back to school after her mom died. It was big news everywhere. It seems like it was a car accident. Big news that her mom died, and her friends have already kind of moved on because she's been out of school for a couple months, and so she's just in this weird place. And then this mysterious man shows up at their house. Lester, played by the great David Dasmalchian, if I'm saying his name right. He's also the host of the Fangoria Awards. Fantastic character actor, and he's in this movie. He plays Lester, who's a very troubled guy. And he comes to Will, who's our therapist and dad, and he's like, "Hey, man, you went through some shit. I went through some shit, and I lost my whole family. I lost them all to this thing. And, I don't know exactly what's going on, but I can tell you right now, you're in trouble too." First of all, how the fuck did he figure that out? I don't know. I don't know how Lester figured that out, but Lester seems to know more than Will knows, and Will's in complete denial. So he's not even addressing, of course he wouldn't address the Boogeyman. He's a therapist. He's like, okay, that's a manifestation of fear and loss and all that stuff. So there's no Boogeyman. We're not going to be talking about a Boogeyman. Then Lester does something interesting, Damon, and I'm still puzzled by it. He hangs himself in the closet in their house. I'm guessing he did that to pass the Boogeyman on to them. Am I getting this right?
Okay, so let me I'm not arguing, but let me clarify what I thought. Because maybe I missed it.
And let me clarify too. My problem with this movie is there's way too many elements going on. But anyway, please.
Yeah, so I don't remember him specifically telling the therapist, the dad, that the Boogeyman was coming for them. I don't remember that part. I remember him talking about the grief and the loss. He talked about his first child died of SIDS, and then as grief besieged them, then they lost their other two children to the Boogeyman, is basically what it said. And the opening of this film is the Boogeyman killing Lester's youngest daughter or son. I can't remember if it was a daughter or son, killing them in their crib. We see that's the opening. And that's actually the only real blood in this film. You see the blood splatter across a photo of the child dying when the Boogeyman attacks. I didn't get the sense of that where he was like warning them the Boogeyman was. I think it was almost like a, here's what I'm dealing with. Can you help me in my tragedy? But I do agree with you on, it seemed like he was killing himself in their home to pass along, almost like the It Follows Smile formula, where he was passing it along and bringing it to them. The problem with that, while I do agree, I think that's what they were doing. The problem is we get into the later part of the film when Sadie seeks out Lester's wife, who has gone completely off the reservation at this point, and she's basically isolated herself in her house, and she's like stalking the boogeyman to try to kill this entity. It's still in her house as well. So it's kind of a weird, like, yeah, I think that's where they were going.
Right.
I kind of get what you're saying, but that goes back to my earlier point about where they didn't lean far enough into two things. They either need to lean further into the grief and really explore that dynamic, and just, again, kind of like The Outsider, where it just attaches itself to grief. It's not about being passed on to one person or another. It's just this creature shows up where there's extreme grief, and it's basically feasting on these people. They could have explored more in that, or two, explore in the mythology, and that's where we missed out on. Was this passed to them? Was this Lesper's way of giving the boogeyman to this family to get away from his wife? They didn't explore that enough, and it was kind of confusing, and that's where I was like, okay, give me the mythology, because they kind of touched on it a little bit. Like when Sadie goes to see the wife kind of tells her, and that's where you hear in the trailer I played, it's been around forever, and they call it the boogeyman. What you hear is pretty much all they say. They don't really explore it. Like, they don't really, like, in the 1700s, like, there was this entire town wiped out for, I know, again, that's formulaic. That goes back to it and a lot of other mythology, but they could have at least explored it, right? Like, they could have at least given us a little bit more, because it never really made sense.
Yeah, there was, because basically by the end of the movie, I was like, so are there two boogeymen? Because there was definitely a boogeyman at the Billings household, where David Dastmalchian and I'll say Marin Ireland, I think was who played his wife, their house, which had been torn apart basically by this tragedy and this boogeyman. I was like, is there a boogeyman there and a boogeyman at the Harper's house? Are they two separate boogeymen, or is it the same boogeyman?
By the
Are
way,
we dealing with boogeymen, man?
By the way, do you remember where you saw Marin Island from?
Oh, fuck.
The Dark and the Wicked.
That Dark and the fucking Wicked. By the way, another demon who attaches itself to grief, dude.
She is a great actor. She was.
That's fucking right, dude. Oh my God. It was driving me nuts because I was like, she looks super familiar. Yep, she was in The Dark and the Wicked, which, by the way, if you have not seen, I know all the hardcore fans of this show already know that we completely stand The Dark and the Wicked. If you have not seen it, you must see it. And I've had tons of people come up to me and go, dude, you recommend The Dark and the Wicked? Holy shit, that movie's good.
Can I just
really
say,
fucking good movie.
Can I just say real quick? Come outside.
That's sad. So, oh my God.
That's a Dark and the Wicked reference.
Boogeyman podcast over. Dark and the Wicked rehash begins. Because that movie fucking rules. I need a Dark and the Wicked t-shirt, like 100%.
So good.
And I digress, but it's another movie very similar to this, and Marin Ireland's even in this movie. but it just left me confused. So that's one problem I have, is like, what was the mythology exactly? They don't really get into it. They don't allow the machinations to unfold, and I'm just like, okay, well, I guess you don't have to if you don't need to. But the other problem I had was, I believe that Sadie, who does really hone in and become our central character, she's got too much going on in her life to take the boogeyman serious. That makes sense. That's logical. I'm okay with that. She's a teen. She's trying to get back into school. She's trying to get back to normal, but she fucking misses her mom. All that makes sense. But she spends so much of the movie, I mean, a lot of the movie, denying the call. This is a very famous hero's journey thing. Is the hero of the movie denies the call until they descend into the different world. This is in the weeds, inside baseball stuff. But basically, the hero of any good film, it doesn't matter if it's a horror or not, the problem comes into their ordinary world and they say, no, I'm good. That's not for me. I'm not into it. I don't believe in it. And then they get pulled in yet again. And then usually a mentor shows up. In this case, it'd be Marin Ireland's character, Rita, who is the surviving wife of the boogeyman, who tries to bring her in. She denies it again. And she keeps denying it almost up until the critical mass moment, which is like 90 minutes into the movie. She's basically like, the boogeyman has to be bullshit. These people have to be crazy. Again, it's logical. It makes sense. I see why she's doing that. But it's like literally the last sequence of the movie where she has to fight the boogeyman, is the first time she really accepts that the boogeyman's real. Like really like fully embraces it and is like, okay, I think it's real now because it took my dad and my sister. And so now I'm going to go after it with very little knowledge and just barely understanding what it is. And I was like, I don't think I buy that. I don't think her taking on the boogeyman was well earned.
Yeah, and here's the other problem with that is that you already had a denier in the father, because the father,
Oh yeah,
psychologist, he's the logical one. He believes his children are just manifesting their grief in the form of a creature, which is what children do a lot of times. That is sometimes why kids start seeing things under their bed. Or, I remember doing studies on this when kids were the children of divorce. That's when a lot of problems would raise, because they're trying to bring up issues that would bring their parents together for a common cause. Their child being terrified of something, or their child going through something that would bring mom and dad back together when they're going through a divorce. Very common thing that kids do subconsciously when they're dealing with tragedy at home or dealing with a hard situation at home. The problem is that you're right. Sadie is our central character, and by the time she makes it to Rita Billings, and she sees this and she realizes that something is going on, that should have been the shift right there. Because the dad is already a disbeliever. We know the dad's going to be. That's classic parent behavior. Parents just don't understand, man. Will Smith told us 30 years ago. We know that he's not going to believe it. So you got two people not believing it. So now it's just on the little 9-year-old kid who's seen the creature. So you play into that too much. I understand at the beginning Sadie's not going to buy it. You figure about halfway through is when she starts to believe it, and then by the end the father believes it. That's how. And again, I understand that's typical, but that's really the layout, the formula of a film when you're dealing with a mythological creature. It's just, it's no different than Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, nobody believes that Freddy Krueger is real. You know what I mean? It takes Nancy to be the one of her friends to be like, this is actually happening. And all her friends around her are like, no, this isn't real. Come on, Nancy, you're crazy. And then, Johnny Depp gets sucked down to the nether regions and blown out with blood. And all these people are dying. No one believes Nancy, but Nancy believes. You know what I mean? She's the one who believes this entire time. The only person who believed was the little girl, and she's not old enough to really lead the story in this way. Now, she does a tremendous job, by the way, but yeah, Sadie's our central character. We need her to be the one, at least at some point, to buy into the mythology. And that's where I think the mythology would have helped, where maybe it is Rita Rita is our backstory character. She's the one who's supposed to be the mythology character. She's the one who's supposed to
she's the mentor.
She's the mentor, yet she doesn't really serve as a mentor. She just basically be like, it's coming for you. It's there in the dark, and it's scared of the light. It's been
she lays out a couple of rules. Stay in the light was her big rule. She thinks she can kill it, but we don't really get into the how of that. Yeah. But you know what this movie's desperately needing, since we're on the topic of Sadie and her denial of the call. This was desperately in need of, and since this movie was already doing a lot of very tropey things, and I don't mean that in a bad way, I just mean tried and true and tested ideas, it needed a team up bad. Yeah. And it needed a team up way sooner than it got it, which the team up at the end ends up just being Sadie, Sawyer, and Will, like mom or dad and his two daughters, teaming up, which seemed obvious, but there was this whole side drama with her friends from school, with Sadie's friends from school. We'll get into that later. That would have been a great team up. And when they come over to the house, that would have been a great moment for all of them to go, oh shit, we all just saw the boogeyman and we cannot deny it. What can we all do to drop our bullshit right now? And okay, maybe one of us runs off, but the other two are like, no, I know what just happened. I know what I just saw. We got to help you. This movie needed a team up. Instead, it was all these people isolated in their little silos, dealing with their shit, and then in the very end, having to come together, having not earned that team up. That team up at the end was not earned. It was a little bit earned between Sawyer and Sadie. I'll say that, because
and that's where it should have started earlier. If you're going to, if your team up is only going to be the two sisters, it should have happened halfway through the film, not in the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, so I think it was desperately missing a team up, and they kind of had one hanging there with all of Sadie's high school friends. I'm like, at least Bethany, which was her close friend that kind of moved on from her when she was gone from school for a few months. At least Bethany teaming up, and then maybe like them saying, Sawyer, get away, you're too little, like it's too dangerous for you, and then she somehow worms her way into it. Like, lean into that if you're going to do that. But it was just by the time it was time to face down the boogeyman with dad and his daughters, it was like it was the very first moment they were even trying to work together,
And I
and you're
and
like,
I I disagree with you a little bit in the team up in that regard, because again, part of what I liked about this film was how isolated to make them. But if you're going to do that, you got to put Sadie and Sawyer together on the same page. You got to make them the team.
right,
If you're gonna play into what I felt was the strength of being them this
sure.
isolated, those three being in there, it's got to be the two daughters against the dad. The dad's the disbeliever. The two kids are together, united in this, and it could have happened way sooner.
And it was this close. They were this close that it just, if Sadie had bought into what was happening much sooner, it would be better. Like, it's just she buys into it so late that it feels weird, as opposed to like her and her sister trying to figure this thing out together.
Yeah, like, they could have been setting Freddy-esque booby traps or whatever.
Yes,
Like little
something.
things like that would have made a difference. Like, like in that scene in, I mentioned Signs earlier, which is a totally different film, but that scene where like they all think aliens are coming except for Mel Gibson's character. And then you got, Joaquin Phoenix's character is kind of a disbeliever, but then at one point, Mel Gibson comes inside, and his two kids and Joaquin Phoenix are all wearing the literally the tinfoil hats. Because even he's finally bought into the fact that it's aliens, and so like that's kind of what you need. Like, you need the one parent and then the two kids to team up together. That would again. I agree with your formula, but I'm saying, like, even in the isolation, you could have done with the two daughters. Like, they were the team.
Yeah, yeah. It was this weird choice to just keep everyone completely isolated the entire movie. Something about that just didn't work for me.
Yeah. All right, let's get into categories. As I said, we don't have quite as many tonight because, again, this isn't a hardcore horror film, so we don't have gore. We don't really have kills, to be honest. But there were some other things we could talk about here. So let's talk, as we always do, kick off the show with best performance. And this is a very small cast. I mentioned, David Desmalchin, who is a great character actor, pops up a lot in these kind of films. Marin Ireland, who we mentioned, of course. Chris Messina, who plays the dad. I've been a big fan.
He's great.
I first saw him in The Newsroom, which is one of my favorite shows on HBO. He was great in that. Sophie Thatcher, of course, who is in Yellow Jackets, which is a show I adore. I think she's fantastic. And I mentioned earlier, of course, the younger actress who plays Sawyer, Vivian Lyra Blair. She played young Princess Leia. So weirdly, a lot of like acting credentials in a very small cast. But Patrick, who did you have for best performance in The Boogeyman?
I think I had to give it to Sophie Thatcher, who is our lead character, who plays Sadie. And mainly it was really for, I think, the first half of the film, which is I'm watching a 16-year-old girl go through a serious tragedy of losing her mom. We're already past the point of, mom's not there anymore. But all these great little scenes, like when she's in her mom's art room and she's looking at the paintings and stuff, and she's putting on her mom's dress, and then she goes to school, and that goes way fucking wrong, wearing her mom's dress. She tries to reach out to her dad, which I thought was just so moving. I don't see a lot of that. That's just not a dynamic that you see in movies. I think it exists more in real life. But the idea that the teen wants to reach out to their dad and wants to talk to their dad about what's going on, I loved that stuff. And I think that the strongest part of this movie, 100%, is Sophie Thatcher's performance.
Yeah, so normally, generally on this show, we like to go in different directions when we do best performance, because I like to highlight what other people have done in this film. And I mentioned Chris Messina is great. The whole cast, honestly, there's not really a bad performance here. I'm a big fan of David Desmalchin. I think he did a great job in Suicide Squad and other films he's done. Great character actor, pops up in a lot of stuff, and I think he's great. But my pick is Sophie Thatcher, and I'm a big fan of hers on Yellow Jackets, which is one of my favorite shows. She's tremendous on there as young Natalie. She plays the younger version of Juliette Lewis's character on that show, and she's tremendous. I feel like Sophie Thatcher is one of those actors who I feel like is going to go on to not only have a massive career, but she's going to be an Academy Award nominee one day. Like she has that kind of, there's a certain gravitas to her that I feel like we're going to be talking about her performance. She's going to be the actor who picks on weird, strange, little quirky roles that are going to get her a lot of, you know, she reminds me of in terms of like her performance and the way she did a movie that I did not like whatsoever, but the performance I liked and the actor I liked is Jessie Buckley in Men.
Sure.
Jessie does kind of those weird, you know, she's a musician on the side, but she also does like a lot of weird kind of quirky roles. I feel like Sophie Thatcher is going to lean right into that. Like she's going to do like really arty, probably a lot of your favorite movies.
Yours too, Damon. Let's be honest. You're getting into the art shit.
I think Sophie Thatcher is incredible. She really does. She does everything in this movie. She does all the heavy lifting, and that's not to insult Chris Messina or anybody else. They do great, but she's the central character. So the weight of the world is on her shoulders, and you feel that the grief she feels, the isolation she feels, even at school when she's around her so-called friends, even around her sister, which we talked about. That went a little too far with the isolation, but she just feels utterly alone. And again, even though I think they should have introduced the team up with her sister dynamic, as you mentioned earlier, they do a very good job of making her feel very, very utterly alone in this film. And Sophie Thatcher sells it so well. She's incredible. So she is the best performance.
Yeah, she's great. You know who I would compare her to, like, or I think would play a great like daughter to Kate Winslet. Like she's got kind of a Kate Winslet vibe, and I could see her. Yeah, I could see her going on and doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's a great. The show Mayor of Easttown. There's another actor.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Andrew Rice, who played Kate Winslet's daughter in that show. She does a tremendous job. Another young actor who just did a show called The Last Thing He Told Me on Apple with why am I forgetting her name? Jennifer Garner. She played the daughter, a similar role, and I think that not similar to this, but I'm saying similar, like a daughter character. I think she's also great, and I agree. I think Sophie Thatcher could be great in that role, and she's tremendous. Let's talk about best scare, because listen, this is a horror film. There's got to be some scares.
Wait, you didn't have a favorite character, Damon?
Huh?
You didn't have a favorite character?
I'm sorry, we skipped favorite character. I'm sorry, we did skip favorite character. I apologize. Favorite character. There is a favorite character in this film. So, Patrick, who was your favorite character in The Boogeyman? Sorry, I was skipping around categories.
It's all good. My favorite character actually was the fantastic character actor himself, David Dasmalchian as Lester Billings. When he shows up, boy, he's just weird. He's odd. And he comes in there and he's there to sort of deliver the warning, I think is what his job is in this movie. And he does it really well. Like David's got this way about him. He does a lot of weird and odd characters. And there was one particular moment I really loved, which is where I think the dad Will is like saying something to the effect of him, like, okay, like, sure, whatever you say. Like kind of brushing him off a little bit. And then David like stands up and he just looks so much bigger and imposing than he normally would. David doesn't have that kind of, he doesn't look like an imposing guy necessarily, but he had in this moment a presence where he was just stoic and like, don't fuck with this situation. I'm being serious. Like I really loved what he brought to that moment in the movie. And listen, I guess you can call him the catalyst. It all really starts once he shows up.
Yeah, Lester is a very creepy character, and he does a great job. And David Dasmalchian is a great character actor, and he can pull that off. And you're right. There is a certain level of you saw the grief and the loss in his eyes as well, but also that he was terrified of something. And I think that's what sold it later in the film when you realize what's actually going on with the Boogeyman. Which, by the way, I do want to mention. I have to throw this out there. I don't know why this popped in my head. There's a great moment when he first meets Will, the dad, and he hands him a picture. He's like, my kid drew a picture of the Boogeyman. He's like, what is this? We don't see it at first. We don't see the drawing. We don't know what he drew. And the page is pulled out of his journal. And then Sadie's character eventually finds the journal and does the old charcoal rendering where she goes over the page it was drawn on, and she does the the pencil to like do
Yeah.
the outline of the thing, and immediately I was like, "This reminds me of The Big Lebowski." When the dude is in there in Jackie Treehorn's house, and he sees Jackie Treehorn scribbling on a pad during a phone call, and he tries to go over and see what it is. He scribbles it, and it's the outline of a dude with a giant cock. It just absolutely cracked me up, and I don't know why, but it made me think of that in this film when she's doing the scratch, and it comes up the image, the outside image of the boogeyman. I immediately thought
of the same thing.
The Big Lebowski, and I laughed inside. I was like, "Oh my god, this is the Big Lebowski all over again."
I laughed outside. I was like, ha! I had a big cackle for that one because I was like, people, there's no way that wasn't a reference from the Big Lebowski. There's no way.
Oh, dude, that's one of the best. All right. My favorite character, honestly, was, and I really did like Sadie, but again, I already kind of gave flowers to Sophie Thatcher for performance. So I'll say Sawyer. I really enjoyed that character, and here's why. We've said this many, many times. This is kind of, I know I'm bleeding a little bit in performance as well. We've said many, many times. We hate doing it when we have to, like, you know, kind of rag on a kid's performance, but we've been honest and said when you have a kid in a horror film, your kid can make or break your film. Just being honest. Like, we've seen films where the kid really makes it, and we've seen other ones where we're like, man, this is really tearing this film down, when you either have a bad or a not convincing performance from a kid. Now, the performance, I mentioned again, from Vivian Lyra Blair is her name. She does a tremendous job, so let me just be clear about that. But also, what I liked about the Sawyer character is that she was a kid that didn't immediately fall into the typical 8 or 9-year-old character kid. She was not an annoying little sister. She was not an unbelievable little sister when she talks about the boogeyman. She was a kid like I'd have to imagine you and I would be as kids. Like, we were probably, you know, I'm sure we were little shits at points.
Oh,
but
yes.
she's very much of that. Like, she's smart. Like, she's intelligent. And I think sometimes movies, and I'm not talking about horror films, I mean in general, I think sometimes films don't give kids enough credit for how smart they can be. And I think she played it, and the script played it very, very well for how smart Sawyer was. And even though she's terrified and she's scared of the dark and the closet monster and all that's there, she's still smart enough to theorize what's happening and trying to figure out. She has there's a great gag, which you see in the trailer. She has this light ball, which I believe is like a moon. It's like a light up moon. I think you can buy it. I'm pretty sure I've seen it online. But it's like unplugged, and she uses that like her nightlight. She sleeps with it. It's like this little glowing ball. She uses it a couple times in the film. First time you see the boogeyman is when she rolls it under her bed, and you see it for the first time. And then later in the film, she rolls it out again. It's a really good gag. I like that gag a lot. It was well done. But she's smart enough to figure that out. She's like, hold on, I'm not just going to look under this bed. I'm going to roll the light and let the light figure it the fuck out. I don't want to see what's under there. I want to let the light do the job. And so I thought she was smart. She was intelligent. There's a great scene towards the end of the film where she's playing video games in a dark room, but the video games are kind of lighting up the room very dimly. If you've ever watched TV in the dark, you know what I'm talking about. And it's kind of lit, but not really. And so she immediately like realizes, oh shit, like I'm in a darkish room, which is bad because even though the TV's on, there's dark corners everywhere around me. And she starts to realize that something's in there with her. So I appreciated that she's a kid and they made her a kid, but they also made her smart enough to figure shit out.
She's clever, but she's still very much a kid.
Yeah.
And like this is something that happens in like way too many horror films, and I think a lot of people like it, and it annoys the fuck out of me, is that there's like an 8-year-old kid that is not scared of nothing. And I'm like, bull fucking shit.
Yeah.
I don't care how tough a kid is, they're still 8. And like when they see a monster, they're going to freak the fuck out. Unless it's a comedy, unless they're trying to play on something. In movies that are as grounded as they can be, and they're portraying a kid that's like tougher than they should be, I'm like, get that shit out of here. That is just so, movies don't need to be realistic to me, but like there needs to be a tonal balance. And when they do that in movies, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And it's just like they just wanted to create a cool character and get a bunch of style points for fanboys. That's what they do. But that doesn't exist. Like, be a kid that's a lot like Sawyer, which is very clever and smart, but also a kid. And when the shit hits the fan, they're like, oh fuck, I'm a kid, I'm scared as fuck. Like, because they would be, they don't have enough life experience to know what to be afraid of or what not to be afraid of. So I liked the balance of that in this movie.
It reminded me a lot of the first season of Stranger Things. Like, the kids are kids, and they are daring, and they're creative, and they're smart, but they're also scared. They're kids. Like, they
Yeah.
make them like legitimately scared. They're dealing with shit you shouldn't be dealing with as an 8 or 9, or in this case, like, those kids were like 12 years old. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you genuinely would be terrified. But yeah, she's still a smart kid, and I like that. All right, let's talk about best scare now that I'm not skipping ahead in categories. Patrick, what was your best scare in the Boogeyman? And once again, I'm gonna spoil here that our scare is the same, but I have a reason for picking the same scare. I'll tell you about in a second. What is the best scare in this movie, Patrick?
The best scare in this movie, and by the way, I want to say this. I want to preface this by saying this. This movie, in one aspect, reminded me actually a lot of Terrifier 2. They're both movies that I
can't wait to hear this one.
I'll tell you how. I'll tell you how. Because while both of these movies are, Terrifier 2 didn't end up on any of my lists at the end of the year last year. It's still a movie I enjoyed, but it just didn't. And this movie's not going to either. But in Terrifier 2, you have gore galore. You have a laundry list. I mean, the list was massive. I think I had to read it off for how many gory moments there were. It was an intensely gory movie. This movie, on the flip side, had so many scares crafted. Whether they scared me or not is irrelevant. I recognize them and I could tick them off because I do that during my note-taking process while I'm sitting there. I'm taking notes on when a scare has been placed in front of me, because whether it works on me or not it's irrelevant. It's a scare. They crafted one. This movie crafted a huge amount of scares and a massive amount of scares. I can't even go through my list. It would take too long to read how many. There's like a scare a minute in this movie. And whether it gets you or not is, whatever. Some people are more scared of things. I told my wife when I got home, I go, you'd be pissing your pants. You'd be so scared of this movie. It crafts a fucking shit ton of scares. So that's my comparison to Terrifier 2. Now, that said, my favorite scare in the movie is a little later in the movie when Sadie is finally really immersed in the situation. I believe it's right after the Billings wife dies, right?
She has the interaction with the Billings wife, I believe.
Yeah, there's an interaction or something, and she goes home, and basically it's kind of hard to deny that the Boogeyman is real at this point. And you think it's very much like a Nightmare on Elm Street moment where I think I'm in reality. And she's sort of asking Sawyer not to bother her in this moment. They're both kind of clashing heads, as siblings tend to do. And then out of fucking nowhere, the Boogeyman like blasts through a door and like grabs her. Well, the whole fucking everybody in this theater went, ugh! Like it got everybody. It was a loud, crazy, fucking super effective scare.
Yeah, and the Boogeyman jumps on her and like kind of almost, he doesn't like puke in her mouth, but he like kind of draws, like you see like this black stuff go into her mouth. It's a really creepy scene.
So yeah.
So I'll agree with you. This is a jump scare a minute kind of movie, and jump scares can be effective. They can also not be effective, but I would say this film is pretty solid with the jump scares. Even again, as you said, not even if they didn't get me, I still enjoyed them and I still appreciated what they were going for. And a lot of them did work, even though I wasn't like jumping. I was like, yeah, I guarantee you other people would be. I picked the same scare for this reason. I went and saw this by myself. I didn't go with anybody to see it. It was me by myself. But our theater was pretty packed on the night of the theater. I saw this on a Friday night, and there was a lot of people in the theater. So I like to judge by the people sitting around me. Since I'm by myself and I'm a lunatic and desensitized to horror, and you have to show me the martyr before I really get like, oh my God, this is creepy, or this is fucked up. I judge by the people around me, and I'm like, how did they react? And that scene, while I would say it was the best scare regardless, some guy at somewhere else in this theater that I was sitting in, when that scene happened, out of nowhere, he shouts, and forget my language, he just shouts, "No fucking way!" And the whole theater kind of chuckled and laughed, and but he jumped. And it was a dude. It was definitely a dude. He jumped and screamed like, "No fucking way!" And it was just a great. I was like, as soon as he did that, I marked it in my phone. As soon as I've gone the Patrick way of taking notes during movies, I took a note and it was like best scare. Even though, yes, that to me was still the best scare. I enjoyed that one best, and it did get me. Like it got me a little bit too. I'm not gonna lie. Like I was like, I didn't see that coming in that moment because it was daylight, and it was a good classic switch because you're not expecting it because the boogeyman only comes out at night. She was in the daytime and it comes bursting through the door, and you're like, oh shit.
Right. Good point.
Good one. Good version that got me as well, but not as much. But it got that guy so much that he screamed out about it, and I was like, yep. Best scare's got to be because thank you to moviegoer who was in the theater with me because when he shouted that and I kind of laughed, I was like, "Yep, it worked."
While we're referencing and trading war stories and old movies we've watched, my favorite shout out, and I mentioned it in the episode that we did for Men, was at the end of Men, the guy with the loudest voice I've ever heard in my life go, "What the fuck was that?" Like, normally I want people, everybody should shut the fuck up while I'm watching a movie. Normally, I reserve the exception for a good scary movie because I'm seeing that it's getting a reaction out of people. So you get that idea, like that guy's saying that because either he's nervous or he's freaked out or whatever. Like it's the real treat of being with an audience when you watch these things. And I do want to give one honorable mention scare was Sawyer in the doorway. I think it's the first time she tries to convince Sadie that there's like a monster in her room. That's right after she saw the monster for the first time, and she's just standing in the door, only silhouetted for an uncomfortable amount of time. And Damon, I'll tell you why it's scary, because this shit happens in my fucking house all the fucking time. And 3 a.m, I look and there's just barely a little bit of light, and there's this alien-looking motherfucker standing in my doorway, and he won't say anything. And I'm like, why aren't you saying anything? Whatever. It's one of my kids. 9 times out of 10, these bulbous head kids.
100%. I have not slept over at your house before, but I'm just warning you, if that day ever comes where I sleep over at the Guerra house, I'm telling you ahead of time, your kid will get a bottle of something thrown at them if that ever happens to me, because I always keep like a drink, like a bottle of water next to the bed. I will 100% pick that up.